Hi there, I'm Dr. Andrea Labuti. Today we're going to talk about autism meltdowns in teenagers. Now, teenagers present a really unique situation because teenagers in general have a lot of pressures, a lot of stresses and anxieties and hormones going on. So life as a teenager can be a little bit challenging as it is. Now throw autism on top of that and things get really magnified. So it's really important to understand why your child is having a meltdown. And there's three main things that we can talk about as a parent to a teenager with autism. Are they frustrated? Is there just too much pressure, stress, anxiety at school or in whatever environment that they're having the meltdown? And three, hormones. Now, understanding these three things or categorizing it as these three things will help you try to get to the bottom of why your teenager is having meltdowns if your teenager cannot tell you. So let's talk about frustration. I'm going to give you an example of a perfect storm and what these parents did and how this turned their child's life around. So there was a 16-year-old boy. He's a friend of mine, their son, and he's nonverbal. And he was 16 years old. This is a couple years ago, 3 years ago, and he was in his classroom, and he was getting worse and worse and worse with his aggression and his frustration and his violent outbursts. The mom told me once it was like he was possessed. It was like someone came in and took over his body. He was just raging and throwing desks over. And it got to the point that the school district said, hey, listen, your child can't come to school anymore. There is no way we can handle or manage him. You know, he's a teenager now. He's strong. We're afraid. And this child had almost no language. He had an occasional repeat of something that he watched on TV, right? Echolalia. So occasionally he would repeat something that he heard on TV. And in this particular meeting where this boy was with the district and the mom, where they were saying, look, this just isn't going to work. We can't take care of him here. He eked out, somehow he got out the words, what about what I need? What about me? So he had heard that, believe it or not, in an Alvin and the Chipmunks video, and he repeated it. What about what I need? What about me? And everybody just was like aghast. So that led the mom to exploring ways for him to communicate. And fast forward, they learned RPM, which is rapid prompting method, and he is now communicating with a letterboard, and he is incredibly brilliant, and all of his aggression and meltdowns completely went away almost instantaneously when he started communicating. So that kind of frustration, being trapped in a body with an intelligent mind that can't speak or express yourself, hugely important to try to find a way for your child to communicate. You've got to figure it out if they're nonverbal or minimally verbal. That was just one example. So what about number two, which is increased pressure, increased stress and anxiety. So whether your child is nonverbal or has Asperger's and is very capable of communicating, what about the pressures and the stresses and the anxieties? You know, a lot of days we take for granted that we all live in a very stressful environment, but for our kids with autism, it can be magnified 100-fold. So really understanding what are the things that are going on at school in terms of academic challenges or lack of academic challenges. Maybe they're not being challenged enough and they're frustrated and feeling stressful about that because they're just really bored. So that's another thing to think about. So really being a detective and trying to understand what sort of pressures and stresses they might be under and how you can remedy that. And it could be something simple like some sort of a visual chart to help them understand what their routine is like, or it could be just stopping and reassuring them while they're doing their work, because a lot of our kids do tend to be perfectionists. So if they can't do it perfect, they don't want to try. So be a detective, try to figure out what's going on at school, what kind of pressures and stresses are they under there. And what you can do about this too, because we, again, all have stresses and anxieties. What you can do about this is consider, is your child getting enough exercise? Are they moving around enough? Exercise is so good for all of us. So that's something that you should definitely consider. And the other thing you should consider is there are some, depending on how bad the meltdowns are, but there are some really good, really powerful, calming, and centering things that you can do. Besides meditation, I don't know if your child will meditate. You might be able to try to get them to just do some deep breaths. We do, take 3 deep breaths when we're having meltdowns with my son, who's a teenager. You can do things like neurofeedback. Look at EEG Info. They are a wonderful provider group of a wonderful form of neurofeedback that really helps. They work actually with the Camp Pendleton veterans in San Diego that have PTSD, and neurofeedback is wonderful for that. So you can imagine if you have a teenager that's having meltdowns, and they're in that fight or flight, much like PTSD, then neurofeedback is a wonderful solution. I urge you to look into that, and you can message me below or leave a comment if you want more information on that. And there's also something called HeartMath. That's a heartmath.com, I think, or .org. Go ahead and look at that. That is a little device or a little thing that clips on your ear, and it's all about just breathing for 5 minutes and getting into coherence between your brain and your heart. Another really good relaxing thing, a couple minutes a day, 3 times a day until the body is able to self-regulate. There's also things like Reiki or pranic healing, all kinds of energy healing, acupuncture, anything that can relax the central nervous system is really, really useful. So number 3, the third thing we're going to talk about is the obvious thing, teenage hormones, right? It's a fact of life, and there is no silver bullet for this. All teenagers go through it. Kids with autism have heightened senses, so it may just be even harder for them. But do please use some of the calming techniques, some of the centering and calming things that I just talked about, because that can be really helpful. And the other thing that is helpful, and I got this tip, and it's sort of a common sense thing, but my nonverbal friend João, who is in Portugal, wrote me once and said, one of the best things, one of the most calming things for me is to go out and be in nature. Just go outside, go to the beach, go get in the woods, lay in the grass. Anything you can do to just breathe and be in nature is a very self-soothing, calming thing. And that from my friend in Portugal, who is a nonverbal autistic man that really thrives in nature, as we all do as human beings. So frustration, stressors in their life, hormones, these are all facts of what could be going on with your teenagers that is having meltdowns. Please just let your child know. One of the main things you can do is just let your child know that you understand, that you are trying to get to the bottom of whatever is bothering him, whether they're nonverbal or not, just being empathetic and letting them know we are going to try to get to the bottom of this. It's going to be okay. One of the things that I do with my own son, and he has meltdowns every now and then, not too often, and he's a teenager, he's 14 and a half. The first thing I do is just, it's okay. Just take a deep breath. Whatever's bothering you, we'll work it out. So pretty simple advice, but it does work. It's powerful. I think we take the simple things for granted sometimes. So I hope that helps. It's very traumatizing for a parent to witness their child going through a meltdown, but there are things you can do. If you like this video, come on over to AndreaLabutti.com. I have lots of things that you can download that will help you on your autism journey. I am here to help you parents with, healing our kids, healing ourselves, healing our world, and finding a place for our kids to fit into this world. So thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.